possibly the only tangible outcome of the current conflict, and that unilateralism has come to stay, and that what he calls might is right is the new global order. I spoke to Dr. Anil Kakotkar, former chairman of India's Atomic Energy Commission, a top expert on nuclear issues, and he told me that if reports that Iran's stockpile was not destroyed, the uranium stockpile had not been destroyed, then Iran retains the capability to assemble crude atomic devices or crude atomic bombs that could be quite potent. I spoke to Syed Akbaruddin, India's former permanent representative to the UN and considered an expert on the Middle East, and he told me, and this is his words, this is a pause, not a breakout of peace. Why does he say that? Akbaruddin believes that this is only the first step in a long, long road, because none of the fundamental issues that caused the conflict between Iran and Israel in the first place, including Iran's nuclear prowess, have been adequately addressed after these strikes or the 12-day war. He believes the truce is temporary because US, Israel and Iran agreed to pause hostilities as they wanted time to assess the outcomes of the war, their strengths and weaknesses. Nothing but the truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengapur of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. This is my weekly analysis of key issues that matter to you without BS, only the truth. US President Donald Trump never ceases to surprise the world with his actions. Trump seems to have made quite a habit of pulling rabbits out of his hat, especially while dealing with international conflicts. Just when the 12-day Israel-Iran war threatened to engulf the Middle East, and along with it his own presidency, Trump came up with something that was pure magic. He bullied the leaders of Iran and Israel into agreeing to a seemingly impossible truce on June 24th. Yet, many strategists think it's too early to praise Trump for this breakthrough and regard the truce as tenuous. I spoke to Syed Akbaruddin, India's former permanent representative to the UN and considered an expert on the Middle East, and he told me, and this is his words, this is a pause, not a breakout of peace. Why does he say that? Akbaruddin believes that this is only the first step in a long, long road, because none of the fundamental issues that caused the conflict between Iran and Israel in the first place, including Iran's nuclear prowess, have been adequately addressed after these strikes or the 12-day war. So in this episode of Nothing But the Truth, we will analyze the three big questions. First, why the truce that Trump pushed through between Israel and Iran is seen as fragile and could break easily. Second, why Donald Trump's bunker buster strategy will not diffuse nuclear tensions in the region. And third, why India should worry about the turbulence in the Middle East. So let's begin with the third question as to why India should be worried about developments in the Middle East. And for India, the biggest challenge of the unrest in the Middle East is economic. India or Iran's threat of shutting down the vital Hormuz Straits or the Straits of Hormuz, had the war continued, it would have led to a global economic crisis. Almost 20% of the world's oil and 30% of the global gas supply passes through the Hormuz Straits. For India, it is even more critical, with the Gulf nations meeting about 40% of India's oil and also its gas needs. Any disruptions in supply could see petroleum prices rise sharply. It could wipe out the big strides that India has made in keeping inflation under 6%. And just to give you an idea, for every $10 increase in oil prices, India has to spend an additional $1 billion. That's close to 8,580 crores, just on imports alone. And especially when India imports over 89% of its oil and gas requirements, any such price increase will send its best laid economic plans haywire and slow down economic growth. That is the first big consequence if, for instance, the Iran-Israel war had worsened considerably. Second, 40% of the annual Indian remittances of around $129 billion. If you convert that into rupees, it's about rupees 11 lakh crores, came from NRIs living in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Remember that 40% of this $112 billion comes from the NRIs who live in the Gulf. We have 8.9 million Indian expatriates living in the region, and if the conflict had turned serious and become a major one, it could have seriously hit all of them living there and therefore impacted India. So two big reasons as to why we should be concerned of what's happening in Middle East. Now let's come to the second question. Why did the war break out between Israel and Iran at this particular time, and why did US join the war? We all know that on June 13th, Israel launched its fiercest ever military attack on Iran. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu justified it by claiming that Tehran was months away from developing a nuclear weapon. He said it was a matter of time and therefore there was a need for speed. This, though the International Atomic Energy Agency, that is the world body that governs international atomic energy decisions, and it's called the IAEA, and its chief is Rafael Grossi, and Rafael Grossi had denied claims that Iran was close to developing a nuclear bomb. However, the IAEA had in fact voiced concerns about Iran's decision in 2021 to enrich a portion of its uranium stockpile to 60% of U-235. Now, it's a complex subject, but let me just explain it as simply as I can. Natural uranium has two major isotopes, which is U-238, which constitutes a majority or 99.7% of the substance, and U-235, which constitutes only 0.7% of the total, but it is the critical isotope which is fissile and which is needed to sustain a chain reaction. So the 0.7% in natural uranium of U-235 is the critical isotope that is needed. To generate power, you need to enrich the concentration of U-235 from 0.7% to around 3 to 5%. And if you want to make a nuclear weapon, then you need to enrich the concentration of U-235 to around 93%. So what Iran has done so far is to enrich a portion of their stockpile of uranium to about 60% of U-235. And this is done through a very complex process using gaseous centrifuges. It is high-tech, and yet, if you look at the fact, one, of course, it's curious that it went up to 60%, but it is still 30% short of weapons-grade stuff and not enough to make nuclear weapons. But it did cause worldwide suspicion as to why Iran was doing it. And this battle, by the way, has been going on between Iran and the IAEA and the rest of the world for over 20 years now. It's not a new battle. Experts say that Netanyahu, the Israel Prime Minister, chose to strike Iran now because Iran's influence in the region has considerably weakened in the past 2 years, much of it because of Israel's actions. I spoke to Mohan Kumar, a former Indian ambassador, and he's done a very interesting blog where he talks of the fact that he believes that with the active help of America in the past 2 years, Israel has defenestrated. He has used this word, interesting word, defenestrated with great success Iran's proxies in the region. And who are these proxies that Iran has been able to degrade? This includes, of course, the Hamas, which carried out the horrific terror attacks on October 7th, 2023. Then there is the Hezbollah in neighboring Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. Israel also played a role in the sudden exit of the Iranian ally Bashar al-Assad in Syria. There was a regime change that was there. So all the major proxies that Iran had mounted and almost encircled Israel had been weakened after the Hamas strike. Israel went after them one after another. Then came the most important development, which was that Donald Trump returned to power as US president for the second term this January. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu saw it as an opportune moment to attack Iran because Trump shared Netanyahu's antipathy towards Tehran, as also his concern that Iran was just months away from building an atomic weapon. Initially, though, Donald Trump seemed undecided on joining forces with Israel against Iran, and many of his top MAGA or Make America Great Again backers were against any US involvement in foreign wars, and Trump had come to power on the back of a campaign in which he promised that US troops would not be entangled in forever wars. He said he had become president to end wars, not to begin them. That was the slogan that he put out. So after Trump assumed office in January, it took a couple of months, but he got his team to begin diplomatic negotiations with Iran, setting a stiff deadline of 2 months ending June 12th for it to reach an agreement with the US, and essentially Iran was to dismantle any nuclear weapons capability it possessed. Now, despite 5 rounds of negotiations, the two sides, Iran and the US, failed to arrive at a deal by D-Day, which was June 12th. The very next day, Israel launched its massive strikes against Iran, using fighter jets and drones to target its major nuclear and ballistic missile facilities. Tel Aviv or Israel combined it with hybrid warfare, including car bombs and assassinations in retaliation. Of course, Iran didn't stay quiet and then fired its long-range missiles. Many of them did pierce Israel's formidable Iron Dome that protects its major cities. Then on June 22nd, 10 days after the war began, Donald Trump took one of the biggest gambles of America, which is joining forces with Israel and joining the war. He authorized Operation Midnight Hammer, as it's called, to defang Iran's nuclear prowess, and this was on June 22nd, as I told you. That mission saw 7 US Air Force B-2 stealth bombers take off from American bases and carry out precision strikes against Iran's 3 main nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The B-2 bombers dropped what are known as the mother of all bombs, called the GBU-57A, massive ordnance penetrators, and simply put, these are bunker buster bombs that are designed to penetrate depths of up to 60 meters before exploding, and were dropped to target Iran's deeply buried Fordo enrichment facility, as well as another at Natanz. The 3rd nuclear site in Isfahan was attacked with as many as 30 submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles from US warships. This is the first time since 1988 that America had carried out a significant military strike against Iran. To recall a bit, in 1998, the US Navy destroyed an Iranian warship and blew up 2 of its oil platforms over seemingly a dispute on mining in the Persian Gulf. So, after a long time, US attacked Iran directly, and after the attacks, Trump declared the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, and I'm quoting him, to be a spectacular military success, and then went on to claim that Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been totally obliterated. Totally obliterated is the words that Trump used. Now, having achieved America's objectives of destroying Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity, as he had claimed, Trump then saw no value in continuing the conflict and forced both Israel and Iran to agree to halt the hostilities. If you look at why both Israel and Iran joined and agreed to do it, and the fact, of course, is you don't take on the US, but Israel claimed that it had dealt a death blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions and repulsed the ballistic missiles threats that he had, and therefore it was okay with going in for a ceasefire. On its part, Iran maintained that it had given a befitting reply to both American and Israeli military adventurism, and despite the strikes, its nuclear capability wasn't dented. So, as I said, it suited both Israel and Iran to accept Trump's call for a ceasefire. But this is why there are some issues that will continue to make this truce tenuous. Because despite Donald Trump claiming that Operation Midnight Hammer was an unqualified success, we have seen mainstream media in the US quoting leaked US intelligence assessments that American military strikes on Iran's 3 nuclear facilities did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program, and that the strikes could set Iran's nuclear program only by months rather than years. Also, very, very importantly, that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium had been moved out of the sites prior to the US strikes, and therefore, that's very important, Iran still possesses it. I spoke to former Indian Army Chief, General M.M. Naravane, who said and was looking at what the reports were coming out from the US, and he told me that he believes that the analysis that the bunker bombs may not have caused the massive destruction that Trump had hoped for is the reason why, possibly why America also wanted to end the conflict quickly, because, and therefore, General Naravane says that he believes the truce is temporary because US, Israel and Iran agreed to pause hostilities as they wanted time to assess the outcomes of the war, their strengths and weaknesses, and he believes that they would then regroup their military forces and possibly go at each other's throats pretty soon if things don't smoothen out at the moment, and if negotiations break down on all fronts. There are other major discomforting implications for the US and Israel, especially the fact that their combined strikes is likely to have failed to destroy, as I had mentioned earlier, an estimated 400 kgs of Iran's highly enriched stockpile. I spoke to Dr. Anil Kakotkar, former chairman of India's Atomic Energy Commission, a top expert on nuclear issues, and he told me that if reports that Iran's stockpile was not destroyed, the uranium stockpile had not been destroyed, then Iran retains the capability to assemble crude atomic devices or crude atomic bombs that could be quite potent. This is the stockpile of U-235 uranium-235, which has been enriched to 60%, which I had mentioned earlier. Now, Dr. Kakotkar believes that Iran can quickly rebuild its centrifuges, given the fact that they have now almost 30 to 40 years in the business, they have the resources and the experience, and so all the US and Israel may have done by its strikes is to have postponed the development. He calls it a cat and mouse game that has been played over the years and is not a permanent solution. What has happened just now is a patchwork one, he believes. Other experts I spoke to said that the real danger is that by targeting Iran's facilities, America, this is very important, America may have lost oversight of Iran's nuclear program. Remember that the IAEA was monitoring Iran's program up till now under the various agreements and even knew about the stockpiles that were there. Iran will now refuse IAEA monitoring and be opaque about its plans, because under the 1968 Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty, or NPT as it has been called, the trade-off, the terms of the treaty was, and the trade-off was for nations to receive technology to develop nuclear reactors for peaceful means and desist from possessing nuclear weapons. If nations agreed to do that, then no other country would have the right to strike open, safeguarded facilities which a nation has put under the IAEA. So supposing as a country you decide that you want to be part of the NPT, you will only use nuclear for peaceful purposes, and you will not go for nuclear weapons, then you and your entire research facilities are safeguarded, meaning that is under IAEA watch, then no country has the right to strike these safeguarded facilities. And we have seen the dangers of that, given the fact that these could then not only be destroyed, but endanger all the surrounding cities as well as populations around it. Similarly to the way, say, a Chernobyl explosion could happen, or a Fukushima reactor that both of them melt down under various different conditions. Now, one of the things that when Israel, of course, is not a member of the NPT, though it is a nuclear weapons power, and but in many of its actions, it has severely undermined the provisions of the NPT. Just to give you a bit of background, in June 1981, Israel's Air Force bombed the Osirak research reactor that France had given Iraq. Then in 2007, Israel used its Air Force jets to bomb a suspected nuclear research facility under construction at a place called Al-Kibar in Syria. And they claimed that North Korea was supplying the nuclear technology and therefore it had to do it. That action, by the way, seems to push Syria to resort to making dangerous chemical weapons instead. So that had its own kind of fallout. As for Iran's nuclear program, prior to 2025, these big strikes, Israel, backed by the US, used covert means to undermine Tehran's nuclear quest, including, apparently, this is an allegation, introducing a computer worm called Stuxnet into equipment at its Natanz facility in 2007 that caused centrifuges to self-destruct. So there have been examples in the past where Israel has intervened directly, but however, this time with the United States, which is the principal initiator and one of the depositories of the NPT, when it joined Israel in bombing Iran's nuclear infrastructure, the compact not to carry out strikes against facilities under IAEA safeguards seemed to have broken. So countries like Iran could be tempted to follow the model North Korea did, join the NPT, then go rogue and develop nuclear bombs. And their excuse now is, you have violated the compact, how do you expect us to keep it? And that's what many experts, including Ambassador Akbaruddin, whom I spoke to, believe that the moment they targeted, or US targeted in Iran's nuclear plants, in fact, would force Iran now not to agree to have any of their plants inspected. They would go opaque, meaning they will go quietly and do things. And given the kind of damage that has been that has happened so far, still gives them leeway to go ahead and build the nuclear weapons, precisely the things that neither US, Israel, or any other country wanted. Akbaruddin told me, and this is a very interesting quote, that the issue is whether the US wanted to employ bunker busters or pursue diplomatic solutions. It chose the bunker buster strategy, and now the jury is out on whether it will pay you the dividend that diplomacy did pay. And he cited the example of President Barack Obama. And during Obama's second term as president, the US, along with the other P5 countries, Russia, China, France, and the UK, and Germany, entered into an agreement with Iran called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, in July 2015. Now, under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to dismantle much of its nuclear program and open its facilities for more extensive international inspections in exchange for billions of dollars of sanction relief. The idea was to degrade Iran's nuclear program to the point that if Tehran decided to develop nuclear weapons, it would take it at least a year to do so, allowing the world powers to mount tough measures in the interim. So that was a big deal that happened at that time in 2015. And under the deal, Iran agreed not to produce highly enriched uranium or plutonium that could be used for nuclear weapons, and allowed the IAEA unfettered access to all its facilities. It also, very, very importantly, reduced the stockpile of highly enriched uranium, which is U-235 at 60%, reduced its stockpile from 10,000 kgs to 300 kgs. That is 97% of its stockpiles of uranium it destroyed. Now, that was a kind of success that the agreement, nuclear deal that Obama had signed along with other big countries with Iran. It also allowed, lifted the sanctions, and many of the sanctions, and that seems to have had a salutary effect. But Trump, however, was dead against the deal that Obama had struck, and so when he came to power, he actually reneged from the deal. He pulled US out of it because he believed that the removal of sanctions saw Iran's economy boom without deterring it from its secret intention to build nuclear weapons. He felt that the deal was not going to actually achieve the ends that Obama and others wanted. Now, after he came back to power, let's not forget, in the first term, he did impose very heavy sanctions on entities that did business with Iran, including if India did business. And in the second term, as we've seen, the kind of action that he's taken, military action that he decided to take against Iran. Now, what's concerning is that barring the rhetorical noises from major powers like Russia and China, criticism of the brazen Israeli and US military strikes was muted. This, mind you, was in sharp contrast to the UN Security Council passing a resolution censuring Israel for its attack on Iraq's Osirak research reactor in 1981, which I mentioned earlier to you. Now, at that time, Israel claimed it was a one-off preventive strike. However, 45 years later, there is hardly any condemnation of Israel or US actions on this particular front. And that is the most worrying thing because General Naravane says this business of collective self-defense approach is possibly the only tangible outcome of the current conflict, and that unilateralism has come to stay, and that he calls what he calls might is right is the new global order. Nations like Israel and the US are imposing their will without formal declarations of war or hostilities, as Russia did when it invaded Ukraine in 2022. And then he went on to say, now no country in the world is safe. The big message is, if you don't toe the line, you are liable to get bombed. And if you don't have nuclear weapons, you are at their mercy. This is a dangerous turn in international affairs. That was General Naravane, who felt that this entire unilateralism business that both America and Israel did without consulting the global order and the global powers that were there to go ahead and strike Iran is a dangerous trend that could impact the world. Now, some experts saw the combined US-Israel action as a paradigm shift in Middle Eastern politics. Ambassador Kumar, whom I quoted earlier, said in the short term, it leaves Israel enormously strengthened at the expense of every other power in the Middle East. Remember, there were 2 or 3 major regional powers of Israel. There was Iran, Saudi Arabia, and of course Turkey on the other side is also very interested in getting into the region and exercising its power. So Israel, as a regional dominant power without a Muslim country to rival its ambitions, is no doubt a serious threat, and one reason why many experts think there will be no diffusion of tensions, especially if, and this is what Ambassador T.S. Tirumurthy, a former secretary in the External Affairs Ministry, has talked about, that Netanyahu, the Israel Prime Minister, emboldened by his Iran adventure, goes ahead and decides to, with his dream of an Eretz Israel, or the promised land covering all the land from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, that could result in Israel annexing Gaza and the West Bank too. Now, annexing Palestine territories would put Israel in direct conflict with the surrounding Muslim nations and result in endless conflict. Already with mounting civilian bloodshed, Israel's military campaign against Hamas, earlier seen as justified, is now being viewed less sympathetically and more as Netanyahu wreaking vengeance to his opponents. The other lesson from this, so there's one major worry, that is that Netanyahu, emboldened by what happened with the strikes against Iran, will go ahead and take over the West Bank and Gaza, and that could lead to endless conflict with other Muslim nations. The other lesson from this conflict, as well as from India's own Operation Sindhu that happened in May, is just looking in terms, from military terms, is how air superiority and armaments capable of striking from standoff distances have come to play a dominating role in modern warfare. So that's the other lesson that we need to look at. India therefore needs to proactively strengthen its strike capability using precision missiles. We saw a lot of that being used by Israel. We saw that happen in Operation Sindhu, and also unmanned combat vehicles like loitering drones with munitions. However, there is a difference between what happened between Iran and Israel. Iran and Israel do not share a border and have 2,000 kilometers separating them. India has common boundaries with Pakistan and China and cannot rely on air power alone. General Naravane, whom I had spoken to and mentioned his quotes earlier, said, in India's case, all 3 military domains, whether land, air or sea, have to be given equal importance, and we have to ensure that we have state-of-the-art technology, especially with manned aircraft, tanks and similar large surface combatants likely to become dinosaurs in the 21st century. So India needs to, there is a lesson for India also in the way the war, Israel-Iran war, was conducted, as well from Operation Sindoor. Even more important is, as we've realized, is to control the conflict narrative and ensure that international opinion remains favorable. That is a big lesson that India has to learn, because neither the US nor Israel nor even Iran have done a good job of trying to convince international opinion about their actions, and therefore there is tremendous unease about the ceasefire being anything but a lasting truce. For more details, you could read my cover story on the subject in India Today magazine. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing But the Truth.